That way we can call the roll. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Senator Rocky Adams. Senator Carroll. Senator Douglas.
Present.
Senator Neal. Senator Nemes.
Present.
Senator Thomas. Representative Blanton.
Here.
Representative Burke.
Present.
Representative Fleming.
Present.
Representative Lockett.
Here.
Representative Riley.
Here.
Representative Sharp.
Present.
Representative Stevenson.
Present.
Vice Chair Howell. Co-Chair Storm.
Present.
Co-Chair Bowling.
Here.
Thank you.
We have a quorum, and at this time, I would like to entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the November 10th of 22 meeting.
Motion. Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it. The minutes are adopted. For those that are new to the committee, my name is Senator Brandon Storm from the 21st District. At this time, I'd like to defer to my co-chair, Representative Bowling.
Thank you, Senator Storm, and it's good to be here today. Appreciate everybody who came out to listen to the testimony today. I would like to acknowledge some new members. Myself as co-chair, Senator Julie Rocky Adams is new to this committee this year. Senator Donald Douglas is new as well. Senator Gerald Neal. Representative Lindsey Burke is new to the committee. Good to see you, Lindsey. Representative Matt Lockett. And Representative Pamela Stevenson. And there she is. So it's great to have you all and look forward to working with you. Before we get started, I will note that the Legislative Oversight Committee staff sent 12 finding sheets with recommendations to the Cabinet and Department of Juvenile Justice for feedback. Deadline for returning the finding sheet is June 16th. Information which will be presented during the July 14th meeting. Also note that the Cabinet, DJJ, and the Legislative Oversight and Investigations Committee staff have worked very cooperatively, sharing information back and forth, so we appreciate that. Thank you very much. Go ahead.
I'd also like to introduce Price Terry, which is our graduate fellow. Are you in the room? Oh, okay. Yes. Right back here, and she's a first-year law student at UK's College of Law and is doing a great job for us. We appreciate your service. At this time, we'd like to have an update from the Kentucky Department of Juvenile Justice, and those individuals at the table, if you could introduce yourselves for the record, and the floor is yours.
I'm Kerry Harvey. I'm the Secretary of the Justice and Public Safety Cabinet.
Vicki Reed, Commissioner of the Department of Juvenile Justice.
Rebecca Norton, the Budget Cabinet, Justice Cabinet Budget Director.
Please proceed.
And what we propose to do is to simply give you a fairly comprehensive presentation about where we've been and the steps that we've taken over almost the last year now, where we are specifically with some of the new legislation that was passed in the last session. This will take a while. If at some point you all want to interrupt the process, of course it's your process, and we'll bounce back and forth a little bit. But before we get started, I do want to echo what the co-chair said. And I know we met back in January discussing this process, and since then an enormous amount of work has been done, and I want to acknowledge Mr. Hotman and his staff who have conducted, I think, as thorough an investigation and review that you could ever want to have. It's always been professional, and I think our folks have developed a very good working relationship with committee staff. And I also want to acknowledge the DJJ and Justice Cabinet staff. We have, I think it's fair to say, devoted hundreds of hours, perhaps more, to cooperating with this review. We've made dozens and dozens of people available to committee staff and have produced probably hundreds of thousands of documents, maybe more. because we appreciate the importance of these sort of reviews and the importance that it be done transparently. So I just want to say that I think it's been a good process, and that we appreciate the professionalism and courtesy of committee staff throughout this process. And I think our respective staffs have done some great work here. And now it's up to all of us to take that and make improvements based on the work they've done. And with that, I would turn it over to Commissioner Reed to begin our presentation.
Thank you. I'm just going to give a brief overview of the department. I know some of you know more about us than others. We operate, as you see there, 8 secure juvenile detention centers. And these are primarily for youth who are awaiting court still. They haven't been found guilty or pled guilty to anything. It's really basically the best way to describe it is a jail for kids. We have 7 youth development centers, and these are for our post-disposition youth, the youth who have been committed or sentenced to us for a term of treatment, or sentenced as youthful offender as, days that they have to, or time until they have to be released by parole or whatever else. So those are fairly small facilities. We have them spread throughout the state. There's 117 youth as of 2 days ago. We have group homes that we operate. In addition to the ones that you see there with our DJJ operated, we also contract for 18 others, and we're in the process of adding another one in Todd County for the next school year. And that's a large number of youth. Last year, or the year before that we had over 1,200 something unduplicated youth. And that was during the pandemic when there was still kids that were not in school. So we expect when this year's tabulation comes out in the fall that we'll see those numbers be a lot higher. We also, in addition to that, operate alternatives to detention. And this is something maybe a lot of people don't quite know or understand. But when DJJ was formed many years ago, it was told we would start operating all the juvenile detention across the state, which was new. It had not been done before. And that we would also have a range of alternatives to keep the lower level kids and kids that didn't need secure detention out. And that has been, I don't think there's any other state in the nation that has the system that we have statewide. And the number of kids. And without that, you can see there for the facilities that we had in detention, I think only 2 more kids than we had in all alternatives to detention on date, 220 kids. So if most of our facilities are 40 beds, so do the math. If we had, we'd have to build 5 more detention centers. And the national number I've seen for that is, for construction, is $35 million a pop. And that's not counting to run it. That's just to build it. So it's a very cost saving. It's home incarceration with or without electronic monitoring. We can do it with an ankle monitor. We can also do it with a smartphone, which is kind of nice. Kids might cut off their ankle monitors, but they never leave their phones. So that's a better way to sometimes keep track of them. We also use foster care. We use emergency shelter, and we've converted some of our own programs and facilities we had to serve this population as we saw the growing need for that. So I also just want to mention, too, that we have community staff. We have 712 kids on some sort of community supervision. It could be probation, parole, which we call aftercare, predispositional reports for the court, and they are there as an arm of the court to help the judges whatever they might do. We also have a lot of youth that we have with our interstate compact. We are the busiest one in the nation. We returned more kids last year than anybody else. This is partly because we're surrounded by 7 other states, so whenever they cross over or go back, we have to be involved with those, and because we're on 75, so you get a lot of runaways coming down from the northern states and heading to Florida. Over the past decade in time, we've really seen our population change. And those of you who understand about Senate Bill 200, which was a major piece of legislative reform, and the purpose of that was to divert low-level kids out of the system, and I believe that did work. Our total felonies in 2012 were 43% of our population in our detention centers. In 2023, it's 72%. So yes, we still have kids who skip school, shoplift a bottle of perfume, get in a fist fight with somebody at school. So we still have those lower level kids somewhat, but it's now the minority. And the majority of our kids we see are involved with oftentimes very serious offenses, including capital ones. Staffing, that's a big thing. We've had issues with that. I think everybody in the nation has had issues with that, not just Kentucky. I would challenge you to Google any single state in the nation and not find out that their juvenile justice agency has struggled mightily with staffing issues. We've limited staffing, degrades our security programming. And let me just say, staffing is everything. We can have a great building, we can have a wonderful school in there, we can have wonderful programs, but if you don't have adequate staffing, numbers of adults in the building, and your safety and security is not assured, everything else really doesn't matter. So it is our most important thing. And also, if you have staff who are overworked, who get tired and exhausted, they make mistakes. And even a minor mistake in this sort of facilities can have major consequences. So it's an important thing. They long had poor compensation. As recently as 2 years ago, it was $30,000, and I'm going to back up a little before that. That was actually an increase that had happened because a couple of years before that, they were down to I think 26. So the fact that we have now been able to upgrade that has helped a lot. You see there in October of 22, there were 60 vacant youth worker positions in our youth detention center. And I'll also mention, in addition to the impact on our staff with the facilities, is on the kids. They know when we're short-staffed. They are very astute. Superintendents tell me that they'll know if they're in their cell who's coming on duty by the sound of their footsteps. And they know that, it's easier to create a diversion. It's easier they know the staff are going to be slower to respond, but it also affects behavior in other ways. If our kids are attention-starved, and if they can't get it in positive ways, they'll go for negative. But having somebody there to talk to you and ask you how it went in court, to talk about that bad phone call you got from home, to just ask how your day is going, helps keep those behavior incidents down. So it really is a ripple effect that goes through our entire system. And at this point, I'll turn it back over.
Thank you. I would just, as we get into the things that, the different improvements that are in process, I would just echo what Commissioner Reed said, and that is staffing is the bedrock issue. It's not the only issue, but I think we would have general agreement on this. Absent an adequate number of well-trained staff, you cannot design a program that's going to succeed. That's where it has to start. And as the commissioner said, if we just go back 2 or 3 years, the starting pay for frontline workers in these facilities was $30,000 a year. That simply was insufficient to attract the workforce that we needed, and I don't think anybody would be surprised by that. So in December of 2021, Governor Beshear announced a 10% raise for all security positions at DJJ as we started working on this problem that was actually, it's a long-standing problem, was publicly acknowledged at least as early as 2017 and probably earlier. Frankly, those 2021 raises, we did not see that moved the needle very much. I think we might have had some improvement in retention, but it certainly didn't help us a lot in recruiting new staff. In July of 2022, the enacted budget provided an 8% increase for all employees, including DJJ workers, and we acknowledge again here today our deep appreciation to the legislative body for appropriating those necessary funds for our staff. Thank you for that. Again, unfortunately, our staffing issue remained stubborn and didn't move very much even after those significant raises. So in October 2022, we were able to engineer increases of starting salaries up to about $44,000 a year for our frontline workers. We did that by reprogramming some dollars, by making a decision, which was kind of a tough decision to take funded vacant positions that we certainly hoped to fill and needed to fill, but had been unable to fill. So we cannibalized the money that was in those positions to increase the pay for our existing staff and use as a recruitment tool. And I would certainly acknowledge Ms. Norton and her staff for helping us to do that. As I just said to Senator Thomas, you've got the best budget person in the state sitting here before you, except for John Hicks, of course. So, but we really appreciate their good work in being able to do that. And after we did those October raises, we did start to see some improvement and some increased interest in the jobs, but it was limited. Then in February, Governor Beshear raised the starting salaries in a further amount to $50,000 a year, and the General Assembly appropriated funds in the last session to continue to fund that level of salary, which again we appreciate very deeply. We have seen, since those increases were enacted, significant improvement in our staffing, I'm happy to report. We're not where we want to be, but we are making improvements now, and we're seeing increased interest in these jobs. And it's, the numbers, having increased numbers is necessary, but it's also nice to have increased interest, because all of you all know, I'm sure, in your own lines of work, that if you have 5 people that you're interviewing for a job as opposed to 1 person who's interviewing for a job, you're probably going to get a better outcome. So we're encouraged by what we're seeing, and again, we appreciate the General Assembly for assistance with those raises. The next slide is a graphic presentation of the improvements that have been made since the first of the year. We've gone from 313 filled positions to 350, which is significant. Our facilities are small facilities, and so they're acutely sensitive to even minor adjustments in staffing either way. And that doesn't tell the whole story, because we do have a lot more applications in the pipeline now, and we're hiring people as fast as we can. And I can tell you that has not been the case historically. We've had many, many instances where we would put out registers and have zero response to those registers, particularly in some of our counties where the labor market is tougher.
Secretary, stop just a moment for me, please. We do have a question from
Sure.
Representative Blanton. I don't know if it's, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, Commissioner. I think you know where I'm going to head with my question here. We've had this conversation in the past. I want to go back to the initiatives, incentives, if you will. At one time, there was a pay difference that was being made in order to recruit, and it was being based on location and so forth. And if you come from certain areas where there was a need, we were paying more than in some areas where we didn't have that great of a demand. And looking at these increases and things, has that been resolved now to where we have everybody back on that same page?
It is my understanding that for the correctional officer classification in our detention centers, they're all the same. Is that right, Ms. Norton? And I know you and I did have dialogue about that, and I'm happy to report they're all the same.
Very good. I appreciate you all addressing that. That was a big concern, and I understood why you did it, but I also understand those individuals that are dedicated, dependable, that was showing up every day. It almost felt like they were being punished. So I'm glad that issue has been resolved. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Thanks, Secretary.
So in terms of staffing, in addition to what we've done with the compensation, we also conducted what I would call a bottom-up review, because we had our staffing complement on paper that said this facility gets so many people, this facility gets so many people, but frankly, I don't really know where those numbers came from. They probably existed for a long time. Some of it probably comes from some of these national ratios, but what we wanted to know is, forget all of that, how many people does it really take to run a safe and secure facility? So we went out and we talked to our superintendents, we talked to people on the ground, and we got a better idea about that. And based on that review, we determined that we needed to increase the allotment working in these detention centers. And at Governor Beshear's request and with the General Assembly's cooperation, we received an appropriation of $9.7 million in this last session to hire an additional 146 Department of Juvenile Justice detention staff. And again, that's based on what we learned from talking to the people running these facilities, because in my judgment, everything with these juveniles starts with having safe and secure facilities. In my judgment, I'm speaking just for me, but we can have Cadillac programming, we can have everything in the world, but if we don't have a safe and secure facility, it's just never going to get delivered, because you're always dealing with other problems. So I think on staffing, which is the bedrock problem, the trend line is good. We're improving. We're now at compensation levels that are competitive for the moment. I think we all need to remind ourselves that labor markets are not static, that they always move. And what is perhaps a competitive starting salary today may or may not be in a couple of years. So I hope we will all work together to make sure that we don't fall behind again, because we've seen the consequences of that.
Before you go to the next slide, we have a question from Representative Fleming.
Sure.
Thank you, Chairman. My question in regards to the geographical distribution of the individuals that you hired. You said January 2023 this year is 313 and went up to 350. Where are they concentrated? Is it evenly distributed, or?
I don't have the exact numbers. We could get that for you. I can tell you that they're not evenly distributed. I can tell you that at every one of our detention centers, we have been able to improve our staffing, and we're seeing increased interest. But, all labor markets are local, and they're all different. So, for example, we've had better success at recruitment in Adair County and in Breathitt County, although we already had pretty good staffing there, than we have in Campbell County and Jefferson County. I don't think it'd surprise anybody that Campbell County and Jefferson County are the toughest markets. And even though we've seen improvements in those markets, it lags behind probably really all the rest of the state because of local economic factors, I suspect. I know as I talk to law enforcement officers, particularly in northern Kentucky, they tell me all the time that they're having a heck of a time recruiting people. And it's good news, bad news. I mean, I have to believe that's because the economic conditions there are very good for employment, which is great. But if you're a competitor in the labor market, which we are, it's tough. You're just dealing with the free market forces.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman. I do have another question, but I will wait until he goes through the presentation.
We have a question from Co-Chair Bowling.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my question is on staffing. You provided the information starting January 1st of 23, and then March 29th of 23, and then a June update as well. Could we see back to December of 2021? Could I get that information just so we can see? Because I think that's when the governor first identified, like, we're having issues, we need to raise pay.
Sure.
Did the 10% there. I'd like to see kind of what we've gone up.
Yeah, I don't have that
Throughout
with
those
me,
steps.
but we'll certainly get that to you.
Okay.
We can do that.
And then also, it looks like we brought on 37 new since the beginning of the year. Of 146 is what you all have identified as what you need and what the General Assembly funded. At 25%, do we expect to get to 100% with where we stand?
Will we get to 100%? I doubt if we'll get to 100%. And let me just be clear what this slide shows. It shows filled positions, and probably we've actually hired more than that would suggest because we probably had some people leave during that time as well. But will we ever get to 100%? I don't think so. I think in many of our areas where we have detention centers, we probably will. But again, we're going to have certain areas, and I've got to say Campbell and Jefferson are always going to be tough just because that's how the market works.
Thank you.
We have a question from Senator Rocky Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Real quickly, I know that you said that Jefferson and Campbell were a struggle for hiring. So that would translate into a capacity problem then for Jefferson and Campbell. So if we have a workforce shortage and then we have a capacity issue, where will those kids be sent?
Well, and I have some news that I'll discuss with you about Campbell in a little bit later. But in Jefferson, for the moment, we are operating the facility at Linden, which and I don't want to bore you all with too much
That's
history.
my district, so I'm familiar
okay.
with it.
But we have to go back a ways. You know, historically, Jefferson County operated its own detention program. And then I wasn't here for reasons I don't understand, probably don't need to understand. In, I think, 2018, 2019, you probably know more about that than I do, but Jefferson chose to exit the detention business. They had operated the downtown facility and turned over the detention business to the state, which made the decision at that point to repurpose a building that it owned in Linden, which was not built to be a detention center and was not built to detention standards. But it chose to reopen that facility in Linden, which I think had about 30 beds capacity. And so it's important to understand that when that decision was made, everybody would have known at that point that Linden never had the capacity to keep all of the Jefferson kids. So at that point, everybody knew there were going to be a lot of Jefferson kids housed outside of Jefferson County. Wouldn't that be right, Commissioner? Yeah. Just because it had a lower capacity. So where we are now, we've had to go in and we're in the process of making a lot of improvements to that facility because it was not built to be a detention facility, which has caused us significant problems. So at the moment, we're only licensed to keep 10 kids there. As we make those improvements, that capacity will increase at Linden. And so all that is to say, in terms of employment in the Jefferson market today, we're in good shape because we're limited on how many kids we are keeping there.
Okay.
Now, if you project forward to when the downtown facility is reopened, that I say this all the time, that's something, there's two components to operating a detention facility. One is the building, but the other is the people. Mm-hmm. And we all have to be thinking about how we're going to recruit a sufficient staff to operate that downtown Jefferson facility because that will be a challenge. You're talking about a lot of people.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. So again, staffing not where we need to be, but certainly much better than we've seen in the past. We do have some additional staffing initiatives underway, and some of this is at the behest of the legislature through Senate Bill 162. We were directed to begin a correctional officer R program, which is we are modeling off of the state police R program. Representative Blanton's very familiar with that. We're getting that underway. We were also, Senate Bill 162 includes a limited duration program that allows us to go out and re-recruit people who worked at the department but left, probably because of compensation. And we can re-recruit them and not have to have them go through the normal Chapter 18 process. And at the moment, we have had about 15 people through that program that have expressed interest, and I think we've hired 7. We have more in the pipeline. And that may not sound like a lot of people, but again, these are relatively small facilities, and bringing on any number of experienced people really makes a difference. So we hope that program will do even better, but any experienced people we get from that program, I think, makes it well worthwhile. Another very important aspect of all of this is just the way that our security policies at these facilities, because we all know that we've had last summer and fall, we had some significant events and occurrences that were just very unfortunate and unacceptable. And so we've taken a look at everything from top to bottom to try to make improvements, and I know that we have made improvements. At Governor Beshear's directive, we've initiated very significant changes to the structure of the detention system, and I think that our facilities are safer and more secure today than they were a year ago. That's certainly not to say they're perfect, but we've made a lot of progress. In December of 22, we separated males and females by facilities for the first time. In January of 2023, we separated male juveniles by security levels based on the severity of the offenses that they're charged. Prior to this, we had boys and girls who were housed in the same facility and in the same pod. And we had offenders that were mixed together. You could have a school truant housed next to some young person charged with murder. And that led that there were a couple of things about that. That's the most efficient way you can use your beds, because you can put a kid in any bed that's open, and we can't do that now. And that's a system that was designed long ago when the detention system was started. That's the way the system operated up until the governor made these changes. And frankly, it was designed for a different time, and as Commissioner Reed said, for a different population. You just didn't see the kinds of issues 25 years ago that you see today, at least the number of these severe issues. And so I think generally, as we've operated that program, that's been an improvement. It's led to more secure, safer facilities. Again, it's not perfect. And I say, as I always do, we'll never have perfection. If you define perfection has no incidents, that won't be the case in a juvenile detention facility. It won't be the case in a jail. It won't be the case in a prison. Anytime you're keeping people in significant numbers in places where they don't want to be, you're going to have incidents. The measure is, are you doing everything you can to minimize the number of incidents, and are you responding appropriately to them when they happen? And we've made great strides in that area. We are, and I do want to tell you about a development in Campbell County where we've been keeping the girls, and we have a plan to make some changes in the immediate future that is based largely on the difficulty in staffing Campbell County. We have more staff there now than we did, but we still are struggling to staff Campbell County. We've been holding it together by sending DJJ employees from other detention centers to work shifts there. The Department of Corrections has pitched in, and we've used DOC personnel, a lot of probation officers, those sort of people to fill in shifts there. But that's not sustainable over the long haul, as you would imagine. And so we've had some difficulties with staffing. We have not had the leadership team in place there that we need. And this causes a concern about whether or not these girls are being kept in the kind of facility we want them to be in. So we've made a decision on a temporary basis. We think this will run about 90 days. No way to know for sure, but we're going to use Campbell County as a short-term holdover and a drop-off point. We'll continue to recruit staff there and train staff. We're going to move the girls temporarily to Boyd County, move the Boyd County boys to Breathitt County until we can get Campbell County in the shape that we want it. That's not something that we want to do, but I think it's the kind of thing that from time to time we're going to have to do. As you manage these populations, you're going to have to call an audible every once in a while to meet the changing circumstances, and that's what we're doing here. The positive thing about this, in my opinion, first of all, it shows that the reorganization that I'll talk about in a little bit is working, because we've been able to have a management group who is focused only on these detention centers, to focus like a laser beam on what's going on in this facility to help us understand what we need to do. And we're trying to do it proactively to get in front of the problems as best we can. This move will be made, I think, in an orderly fashion, and we are absolutely committed. This is not going to cause any additional transportation burden to our local law enforcement agencies. We know that's a concern. We know that's a concern that all of you all hear about from time to time, I expect. And we're not going to further burden our law enforcement agencies because of this move. So I wanted you to know that this will be going on in the near future. You know, another issue we have in Campbell County, we have actually in a lot of places, but we're also dealing with a significant number of juveniles who have really serious mental health problems. And obviously, those juveniles need a lot of care. Sometimes they need more care than it's possible to deliver in a detention facility. And when you have that situation, I mean, those situations are staff intensive. They soak up staff resources like a sponge in water. And so we've seen just the need to make this move in Campbell County until we can get things where we want them to be there. Another change we made that I believe has been positive and has been made necessary because of an increasingly aggressive population is we have, for the first time, equipped our security staff with non-lethal defensive equipment, which comes down for the most part to pepper spray, to shields and face masks. There are also tasers at the facilities, although the tasers are locked away in a secure area and would only be used in the event of a general disturbance, not in order to get control of a smaller situation. This equipment was distributed to facilities starting in February of 2023. All of our staff, security staff, has now been trained and certified on OC spray. And of course, this is a requirement that was included in Senate Bill 162. And as with many items, we're grateful to our colleagues in the Department of Corrections who have been very helpful with training. And again, I think this has been a step forward, and I think most of our people believe that. Think of it this way, in the absence of any kind of defensive equipment, if you have a youth who becomes aggressive or violent, the only alternative at that point is some sort of physical altercation. And if you can bring a situation under control using OC spray, seems to me that's a better result than a physical altercation. Now, the first option in every case is to try to de-escalate the situation through talking, but sometimes that's not possible, and sometimes attacks occur with no warning. In fact, all too often that happens. So that's a change that we've implemented that I think will be an improvement. We also, beginning in December, we started providing training to our security staff concerning security threat groups. And we recently have instituted a program where every detention center will have a security threat group coordinator. Again, this is something that Department of Corrections has a lot of expertise on, and they've been very helpful in training. But this is a program where we're better able to identify juveniles that come into our facility that may be affiliated with groups who may have as a purpose to cause disturbances or to engage in some sort of violent or disruptive activity. If we can identify that on the front end, then we have the possibility of maybe separating those youths and maybe preventing incidents before they ever happen, which is certainly our goal. In March of this year, we began working very closely with the Department of Corrections to develop an emergency response team for every facility. And again, this is also part of Senate Bill 162. And so we're at work in developing the criteria, in making sure that the emergency response team has the equipment that's necessary, and that they have the appropriate training, and that we recruit the appropriate individuals to constitute an emergency response team for every facility. That's something that you hope is never needed, but if we had some sort of general disturbance, we would have this core of people who have heightened training to be able to deal with those issues. We are also developing agreements with local law enforcement agencies, every place we have a facility, so that we're better coordinated with those agencies in terms of how they will assist in responding to various situations that may arise in the facility.
Before you go on to the next slide, we have another question
Sure.
from Representative Blanton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, speaking about intelligence information and the Department of Corrections, is there any ongoing or consideration on intelligence sharing of information, not just with the Department of Corrections, but I could see this being an opportunity of sorts for juvenile justice, corrections, and law enforcement in general. I know KSP, I'm sure Louisville, I'm sure Lexington, they have their own intelligence branches that, and I know how tight-lipped they want to be on intelligence. I get it. I've walked in those shoes, but it could help you all from knowing if there could be some type of agreement and sharing of intelligence. It could help you all in the juvenile justice. It could help you in corrections, but it could also help law enforcement out on the street as well if there was some collaboration there, and especially when we're talking about these security threat groups, that it could be beneficial for all involved. Is any of that going on, or is any of that being considered, or?
No, I think some of that is going on, and I agree with you. And I would say at this point it's primarily between DOC and DJJ, but I think there's also room to have those kind of relationships with local law enforcement. You know, we have to be sensitive, and we always will be, that we're dealing with juveniles, and we're dealing in detention with a population of people that, you know, they've not been adjudicated at that point of being guilty of anything. So we'll certainly be sensitive to that. But I know there's now a lot of communication between DOC and DJJ, and I think we're, you know, to the extent that helps us to have safer facilities, we certainly would be open to it.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
In December of this year, we also made the decision, and this was later included in Senate Bill 162 as well, to have our correctional officers wear uniforms. We thought that would just create one way to create a little more of a professional atmosphere We now, I think, have distributed uniforms. I was in one of our detention facilities Monday, and I think they look pretty good. So I think that's, again, a little bit of a step forward that we were happy to make. The next area that I'll briefly discuss is training of our people, and we are having monthly emergency response training for all of our facilities. We're looking to begin that really right away. We are, in accordance with Senate Bill 162, we're going to provide management training for all of our people that are interested in leadership in positions in the department. And we have a couple of lines on them. I think will be a pretty good way to deliver that. And we are also working with EKU to assist us to really do a stem to stern review of our training academy, where all of our DJJ people are trained. And I think that we don't need to assume anything. I don't assume that our training is 100% what it should be or is 100% wrong. I don't assume anything. I think what we need to do is start with a blank piece of paper, and we need to figure out what one of our employees should know how to do the day they walk out of the academy. And we just need to rebuild our training program from the ground up. And I don't know if that'll mean big changes or very little changes or no changes, but we're going to take a fresh look at all of that because times change. And again, this population has changed greatly in the last 10, 15, 20 years. And we need to make sure that our training has kept up with that, because that will keep our people safer, it'll keep our juveniles safer, and it will allow them to better take advantage of the programming that we offer. As I mentioned earlier, Governor Beshear proposed a reorganization of the department to align our management by function as opposed to geography. We were very grateful that the legislature enacted that reorganization in Senate Bill 162. And in simple terms, it does a couple of things. It splits out the detention centers, the 8 detention centers, and puts those detention centers under a separate management line, because the issues that you encounter in a detention center are not the same issues that you encounter in a group home or a youth development center. And so by realigning those to have a separate management team, I think we're able to get better focus on the things we need to do to have secure facilities. The reorganization also created a compliance division that reports directly to Commissioner Reed. This builds on the quality assurance work that was going on before, but it expands that work. The compliance division is going to have carte blanche in a lot of ways. The compliance division is making unannounced visits to our department facilities. They can walk in the door of a facility and they can talk to anybody there, any staff member. They can talk to the juveniles, and it's just a good way to kind of see maybe issues before they turn into big issues. And I think it will also be a good way as it develops to make sure that really good practices maybe that have been adopted in McCracken County migrate to Breathitt County and vice versa, because we want to make sure that we're operating these facilities consistently and that our policies are consistently enforced, and that that we figure out what the best practices are and that everybody utilizes them. For the first time in Kentucky's juvenile justice system, we created a director of security position and a director of the Office of Detention. We've hired Larry Chandler and James Sweat to fill those positions. Mr. Sweat is the director of the Office of Detention. He started last month. He has a wealth of experience in the Department of Corrections. He's been a warden at adult facilities, and he also has experience working at the Department of Juvenile Justice. Mr. Chandler also has an enormous amount of experience in the corrections area, and it's not an overstatement to say that he's really a legend in the Department of Corrections in Kentucky. He probably trained most of our wardens. So between them, these two fellas have probably 70 or 80 years experience in running secure facilities. And so I think that's going to be help us start from a solid platform as we continue to make improvements. And as I say, I think we're already seeing that that's working. They're able to, but because their portfolio is smaller and more focused, I think we're going to be able to identify some of these issues earlier than we have in the past. I would also say that the safety and the security and the efficient operation of these facilities in this day and time depends on accurate and timely data. The data system we have at DJJ was built for a different time and a different population, and the recent events have made clear that we need to make significant improvements to that system. I think as I've recently read, and I think I knew this already, that the last major upgrade to the data system was made somewhere between 2010 and 2012. There's been a lot of things that have happened in technology since then. And I'll be very frank with you, as we encountered some of these issues, it was very difficult to access in a timely way the kind of historical information we needed to manage these problems the way they needed to be managed. So we decided we had to address that. And I think we made this decision in December, and in January, DJJ was added to the Kentucky Offender Management System. We call it COMS, to that master agreement. This is the data system that the Department of Corrections uses to track 20,000 plus inmates we have in Kentucky. It's a system, therefore, that we know a lot about. We have a good relationship with the vendor, and the vendor has a module that is built for juvenile justice facilities. So we are in the process of implementing that COM system, which I think will be a quantum leap forward for the department. I think the management of the department will have tools available to help get in front of issues instead of chasing them that just have not been available in the past. This is going to take a while. We are currently working on phase 1. We expect that it will finally be completed in early 2025. But as I suspect all of you know, this is a long process. We also are making critical improvements to our facilities. We've had a lot of work underway at Jefferson, Warren, and Breathitt. As you all probably know, these detention facilities were built, for the most part, probably 25 or 30 years ago, some of them longer than that. Frankly, I don't think a lot's been done to them in that period of time in terms of truly major enhancements. Some of the shortcomings in these physical facilities were significant contributing causes to some of the issues that we encountered last summer and fall. So we did a couple of things to try to figure out how to address that. One is Mr. Chandler's first job, I talked about Larry Chandler, was to go inspect every DJJ detention center and youth development center and look at it through his security eyes, and to give us advice on what security holes we had in those facilities, and he's done that. We also contracted with the American Correctional Association to do similar work to inspect our facilities and identify necessary improvements. This is course, the ACA does regular audits of our facilities, but this was a different kind of work. This was focused on looking at these aging facilities and helping us understand what kind of improvements needed to be made. We've also been able, again, to leverage the expertise that exists at the Department of Corrections to help us move forward in these areas. And so we're making a lot of facility upgrades at all of our detention centers. This includes modifying doors. In some places, the doors were just completely insufficient for the job, better locks, cameras, control panels, upgrading the technology in the control rooms where it's necessary, exterior fencing where that might be necessary. So we're really making a lot of improvements to these physical facilities. As all of you all know, the department faces significant challenges in dealing with the mental health issues presented by our population, and that's been addressed in a number of ways in both House Bill 3 and Senate Bill 162. Commissioner Reed's going to discuss those issues.
You can see from this slide just a reminder of what was passed in the recent legislation. The first was that we enter into sufficient contracts, that we have available institutional treatment for kids with severe mental illness, and we also need to provide them access to mental health professionals, and $1.5 million for us to establish a diversionary program to identify and provide treatment for any youth suffering from serious mental illness. This is also being done in conjunction with SEAC, for those of you who are familiar with that. And so we've been meeting and developing that, and they, as well as us, are excited about that prospect. House Bill 3, we've talked a lot about 162, but House Bill 3 requires automatic detention of youth accused of certain offenses for up to till their detention hearing. As you know, kids aren't allowed bail. So they have a detention hearing. That's their legal safeguard for that, or what the equivalent would be. So they would remain detained from the time of arrest until their detention hearing. The delay on that has been put off until July 1st, 2024. I think that's mainly, and I think we're going to be just addressing this in a minute, of bed capacity issues, because we expect a significant new number of youth to come into a system to see whether we actually have spaces for those. And then House Bill 3 allows for youth to have detention, and to have visitation from nonprofit groups and faith-based organizations, and that's very welcome. We've always welcomed anybody into our facility that has a legitimate reason to be there. And I will mention one thing that we haven't addressed is that how COVID has affected our facilities in the last few years. And one of the big things was we used to have a lot of community groups come in, and when COVID struck, we had to, of course, shut all that down. When COVID ended, we opened back up, but we reached out, but a lot of those had kind of, gone away. And so we've really struggled and worked hard to try to get some of these community groups back in, because the more people that are in there involved with our kids and staff, the better. The other thing on here is just to talk a little bit about what we face in detention. And it's very different. When we have a kid who's going to one of our post-disposition facilities, one of our youth development centers, or our group homes, we know all about that kid. They've been in detention probably for weeks or months. We are done a complete classification packet, talked to parents, gotten the school information. The kid knows they're going to placement. They arrive during the daytime when staff are expecting them. They've been fed. Nobody's coming in hungry. They've been seen by medical staff. They're on their medications. They aren't high on drugs. We know that kid was in foster care at 8, that he's a special ed student, that he's allergic to peanuts, and that last year he tried to commit suicide. So we know all that coming in the door. We're ready. Now switch over to detention. When the kids come in, they show up at our door. We know their name, their charge, and their age, if it's correct. And that's all we know. So, this kid might come in at 3 in the morning, may not have eaten in days, may still be high on drugs, could be diabetic and need insulin, and not have other medications. And just to give you the range of kids we deal with, just in the recent times, we've had a kid come in who's paralyzed in a wheelchair, a girl with Down syndrome, and nonverbal autistic kids. So you can imagine when they come in and present at all hours and all days, and it's not like our post-disposition, that one kid I just talked about, he may be the only kid that's there that week or for 2 weeks to be admitted. In detention, it's in and out to court, out to detention hearing, and released once somebody comes and gets them. New kids brought in all day, 24/7. So it's a much more stressful, difficult environment, and that makes it kind of hard to provide some of the services that we want in detention for mental health. We do have mental health folks there, and we provide education services. We try to do as much as we can, but we are somewhat limited on our formal evidence base that we do in our long-term facilities. Again, that constant chaotic coming and going. Youth may not be guilty of the offense of which they're detained. Their parents and the youth have the right to refuse treatment because you haven't found them guilty of anything, so you can't order somebody to do something if they don't want to be involved. And look, we're contracting with one group, and one of the big holdups has been is they won't come in and do anything until they know they have a parent consent form every time before they see the kid. And then again, the duration of how long the kid's going to be there is very different. We may have a kid come in at 2 in the morning. He goes out to court at 7. We never see him again. May have a youth there 6 days, 6 weeks, 6 months, and we have some kids who've been there up to 3 years. You've got young kids, older kids, kids who need specific sex offender treatment, an arsonist, a kid who just skipped school. So it's difficult to provide with that kind of group together that we want to, do the services. But we do want to give them all the services that we can.
Commissioner, before you go on, we have
Yeah.
a question from Representative Sharp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, you mentioned you had a child with Down syndrome. How do you handle the special needs population?
Well, we do the best we can. You probably heard me anyway, right? I'm loud. So, we look at all of those, contact the school system, find out what information, and we'll flag those. Our counselors will notify the mental health folks that we have a special youth in there that may need some additional services and so forth.
As a father of a Down syndrome child, I know that there's things they can do, things they can't do, depending on their level of how they function, their functioning level. So I was just curious on how this goes with the department, with the juvenile justice folks.
I appreciate that because I'm a parent of an autistic child, and I know for the issue too that if he had ever ended up in such a place, I know the extreme measures we know what sets him off and what didn't set him off and those sorts of things. So I can well understand the concerns on that. And quite frankly, I really don't know that a youth with Down syndrome really needs to be in detention. That we honestly try to see if we can't expedite them going to a more appropriate spot as soon as possible.
Well, that's where I was going. Thank you.
We have another question from Representative Blanton.
I don't know if it's a question so much as a comment, but having Down syndrome individuals in my family as well, I have to question and wonder why are autistic or Down syndrome even being brought to your facilities unless, I don't mean to be very blunt, but I'm going to be very blunt, is parents not able to maybe control them in a manner and they're pushing them off on you guys to try to do that. But I don't see any reason why somebody with either of those, and I'm sure there's other disabilities out there as well that you probably see that you scratch your head of why are these people here.
Yeah, that's the one thing, and I'm glad you brought that up. We can't control who comes to our door. If they come and they have a court order, no matter how much we might question whether this is appropriate or not. But the other thing is that we are often the only game in town. If some youth, we have homeless kids, if they need 3 meals and a cot, we're it. So by default, we see, and that's one of the reasons our detention alternative people stay so busy, and we've hired more of those because we really work hard to try to get those kids out and into more appropriate places and into services. And we have really broadened our community. We've expanded statewide. It's a youth advocate program that does intensive wraparound, assigns a mentor to the kid and family to look at what they need. If you have some kid who's stealing because he's hungry, then mental health treatment may not be what he needs. What he needs is that somebody goes and helps mom sign up for food stamps and other things so that he's no longer doing those types of things. So we get, people, I think, would be amazed at the range. They picture, when you hear a juvenile offender, I think one thing, but we get very broad. We have 11-year-olds come in. And then, like I said, we have kids who've done nothing but skip school. So we mentioned the fact that we were charged with developing contracts for our severe mental health youth, and we did issue an RFP for that. This closed, and we did not get any responses. And I'm just going to say I wasn't really surprised by that, because historically what we found is that the hospitals and so forth that are out there are private, and they're not required to accept our youth. They choose who they want to serve. And our kids are, to be quite honest, often very, very difficult, very violent sometimes, have sexual acting out issues, and so forth. And if they choose not to serve them, then, that is their choice. So again, we kind of become the custodian of last resort oftentimes. And some of those kids, as the secretary mentioned, it's just detention is not really an appropriate place for full-time medical care and sort of forth with the extreme hospitalization needs that some of these kids have.
Commissioner, we have another question from
Sure.
Representative Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, could you, I guess, explain to me the procurement process you went through and what prohibited those individuals to not submit a response other than what you mentioned? You said that they choose to do this or not. But I also look at there's a higher calling, a higher obligation the private sector needs to provide the community, regardless if it's detention or regardless of whatever, particularly when it comes to mental health. Could you expand on that?
And I can't totally speak for those folks too. I do know that they have had many of the same staffing issues we have, and that beds have become unavailable because they don't have enough staff. We had one facility sometimes that we referred, one for the acute hospitalization, it was 40 beds, and they could only take 8. That's all they had to staff it. And they grapple with some of the same issues. But again, they're private, and they get a whole lot of kids referred to them. And so it may be that, whether the choice between one of our really difficult kid or some kid in the community who's threatening suicide, that they may tap that youth instead of ours. Is that the best way to?
Yeah, and I think, just in terms of the procurement process, probably Ms. Norton, of the three of us, I bet understands that process better than any of us. But I will give you an example, because I think this is a really, really important topic. What the commissioner says is exactly right. There are kids that are in these detention facilities that shouldn't be in a juvenile detention facility, but there's no place else for them. And so one way to help us solve the DJJ problems is to solve these other problems and have these kids in places where they should be and where they're getting what they need. And just an example, and I've talked about this before, so I'll apologize if some of you have heard this before, but there was a young person we had in detention that a lot was written about last fall, and about the issues with this young person down in Adair County. This was a young person who had a severe mental illness. There was no question about that. The department tried, I think, over the course of a year or so, 9 different placements in treatment facilities for this person, because that's where this juvenile needed to be, was some place where treatment for mental illness was available, not in what the commissioner described as a jail. Those 9 efforts, none of those facilities would take this person. There was a facility that agreed to take her. In fact, this happened twice, I think, that they said, okay, we'll treat this person. And when she got there, as I understand it, she immediately assaulted the admission staff in a very serious manner and injured them because she was uncontrollably violent, because she was mentally ill. Well, the management of these private facilities said, we can't deal with that. We're not going to admit that. So one of them was actually an out-of-state provider. So that's a situation, I think it's fair to say, Commissioner, that you encounter on a fairly regular basis. Is that right?
We do. I mean, the term we hear oftentimes is that they're too acute for their care.
So just to follow up on that, so then what happens is that kid comes back to a detention facility and is cared for by people who are doing the best they can, but they're not healthcare providers. And so the result's not going to be great.
Just to add for the RFP process question that you had asked, so in this case, an RFP would be developed by the department as far as providing what it is that they're looking for. In this case, institutional mental health treatment for youth. So it would have some details in there as to what they're hoping to receive from somebody that would be bidding on this. Of course, in an ideal situation, we would hope that we get more than one response so we could kind of compare or look at cost provided by each or services provided by each or even location or possibly contract with both of them. In this case, we received no proposals or no responses.
Is part of the reimbursement?
So in this case, it would be a bidding process. So if there was a hospital that wanted to bid on this, they could essentially tell us what their proposed rate would be to provide those services.
Okay. And I assume you'll go through, sorry, Mr. Chairman, just bearing ahead. I assume you would go through some type of evaluation on the procurement. When they submit something, you go through maybe a weighted scale in terms of what the quality is, from equipment to the facility to personnel, and costs should not be the only factor. It should be actually a minor factor.
Correct. So in the RFPs, there will be that are published by Finance Cabinet, there will be a chart within them that kind of outlines how the responses would be scored when they come in. So kind of the things that we would consider to be the most important within those responses may have a higher weight. And then so whoever's responding understands, what things are being evaluated when the RFP committee is reviewing those.
And I appreciate that. There's some departments in the administration, and it's been this for a long time, that don't go through that process. So it's more of a quality-based selection, and I appreciate that. And I've sort of come from that background. But I want to bridge on why these organizations aren't being more receptive. I understand your explanation, but part of me is also thinking of what can we do from a public-private partnership in order to give some incentives in terms of providing this outlet for people not to returning, but really being misplaced or not being allocated properly, and should be going to another facility. So I want to hit your thoughts about that. Have y'all considered doing that and so forth? And the other question is, are some of these individuals, I'm sorry for pointing my pen.
That's all right.
Do some of these, should they be in a hospital? Are they to a level of being hospitalized? Because obviously there's a process to go through that as well.
Well, there's a lot to unpack in that question. Yes, I think we are open to any solution that will work for these juveniles and get them where they need to be. And really, long before this procurement process, which was part of Senate Bill 162, we've worked with CHFS. I know Secretary Friedlander and I have discussed this many times. I know CHFS is working hard and has been for some time to try to find a provider and to craft some sort of arrangement to take these kids. And I'm talking about, the population at any given time is not that great. I'm talking about kids who are severely mentally ill and consequently also very violent and very aggressive. That's again, thankfully we don't have 100 of those, but every one of those cases is a tragedy, and every one of those juveniles deserves appropriate treatment. And I've also got to say, from the standpoint of trying to run detention facilities, it's hard to imagine how difficult it is to maintain someone like that in a detention facility environment. It It's incredibly difficult for our staff. We've had in some of these detention centers where they face these issues, we've had a lot of staff members quit just because of these issues. So there has been a lot of discussion and work going on to try to find a provider that will deal with these situations. We had a meeting, Secretary Friedlander and I and others. And there was a provider represented in Senator Carroll's office near the end of the legislative session and had a discussion about this. But unfortunately, at this point, nothing has come to fruition because, again, and I understand it, I'm not condemning anyone from the provider standpoint. It is very difficult to care for people who are prone to these just unprovoked, spontaneous acts of violence.
Well, I encourage you, and I'd be more happy to help facilitate or participate in the process. It seems like you said you mentioned one provider. I would encourage you to have maybe as many providers as you can to have a brainstorming session in order to try to resolve this issue, because obviously they're not being properly placed, and it just, unfortunately, there's a flaw in the system, and we need to try to find a fix with that. So I would encourage you, like I said, I'd be more happy to help participate, facilitate in order to try to find a solution with the private sector to make something come to fruition.
And I appreciate that. And I do want you all to know that this is not a circumstance that has gone unaddressed for lack of effort or lack of work. I mean, I think people are working very hard to find a solution to this. It's just a very difficult problem to solve.
Senator Douglas has a question.
Thank you, Chairman Storm. First of all, I just want to say thank you for the presentation that you're giving. It's a lot of really good information, but I want to follow up on what was just said. I mean, there's no doubt that we would love to have fewer people in the juvenile detention centers that have either mental or behavioral health disabilities. Two quick questions and just short answers, please. Just short answers, and I'll ask both of them if I can, Mr. Chair, and then let them answer.
That's fine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Number one, what percentage, if you could, and Commissioner, I'll direct this to you, what percentage of those who are brought and detained at the juvenile detention centers are there due to mental or behavioral, or let's just say mental health issues, versus those who are determined to have a lack of structure, discipline, and accountability at home? For some reason, we don't like to talk about those things for fear of, and this is true, for fear of hurting someone's feelings, but we're dealing with our future population, our future adult population. Second question, has there been any comparisons of the records when these kids are evaluated? Are they broken down into those two categories or different categories, or are they simply evaluated and said, okay, yeah, they've got to be here? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner.
Well, I'll start with your latter one. We have a screening tool that we use for every youth that comes into detention, our MAISY, which is the nationally recognized, and it's broken down into all sorts of categories of function. We're able to use it, try to flag which kids might be suicidal, which kids might be depressed, which kids have, longstanding. A lot of our kids are dual diagnosis, and the other thing to realize, along with the mental health, is substance abuse. And now we are actually having kids who have substance-induced psychosis, because you're nodding your head, you know that. The national figure for youth in the juvenile justice system, this isn't just detention, this would be across the whole thing, is anywhere from like 60 to 80% of youth have a diagnosis. It may be just ADHD, it may be something else, minor, all the way up to schizophrenia and others. So it's very prevalent in the juvenile population. And sometimes those kids are both. They're also the kids that don't have the parent accountability and so forth. And I'll speak back to the fact that as a person who has a child with autism, and my husband and I being college educated and having funds and so forth, we were able to buy and get a lot of services for our child that maybe a single mother of three in a poverty area might not be able to access. So you get into some multiple, it's a lot of our kids, it's really hard to pin down, and we do have some kids who just come in who do what I call stupid age appropriate thing. And for any of you all who are like, remember when you were 14, 15, and 16, Representative Bryant's smiling, may have done something that was maybe not your finest moment. So we do get some kids in that do those sorts of things and don't need any kind of long term. And then we get some that are, just in poverty-stricken neighborhoods and don't have the access to a lot of services and have gotten involved in things that they shouldn't with kids that they shouldn't, and they just really have gotten into that lifestyle. So we do look at all. We like I said, we kind of have a mixture of everything. If that answers your question adequately.
It does. Thank you very much.
Representative Sharp has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At any given time, what is the population of these special need kids that the juvenile justice is taking care of?
How would you define would you mean like a kid who have a
Down
special
syndrome, autism, kids that probably should not be there?
I could get that information for you. Well, now there's a really difference between kids who should not be there. We kind of have it broken down in a way I look at it as two things. We have kids that may come in who have stolen a car or done a robbery who have a mental health issue, and we sort of feel like those kids are still appropriate. And then we have those kids who come to us because of their mental health issue. They're having an episode, the police are called, they slug the police, they slug the ambulance driver, we've had all of that, and they end up in our system for that. We had one youth that was there because he went to kill himself and he took his father's handgun, and the police were able to be called, talked him out of doing that. Well, but then he was charged with minor in possession of a handgun, which is a felony, and detained. And in this case, the court didn't want to let him go because he'd made it clear his number one goal in life was to kill himself. So you get into that sort of different types of kids,
if you can break it down for me, the Down syndrome, autism side.
Those are smaller. We don't get it. We have seen a whole lot more autism kids than we ever saw before. This is my second time back with DJJ, and it used to be kind of unknown, and now we see that on a, fairly frequent basis and all the time. We may have 2 or 3 kids in the system at one time with that in our detention centers, and so it's not a real high population compared to the kids that have the conduct disorder and OCD and some of those other types of things. And of course, you get our kids with trauma history. I mean, we had one child who came to us that had 64 prior placements before they came to us, and obviously they had trust issues. So we get into, kids who saw their parent killed, who saw other people killed, and so we have really tried to ramp up our trauma-informed care. I mean, we've done everything from buy weighted blankets, if you're familiar with those, which are kind of be soothing for kids, and to, softer furniture, and just anything we can do to, as far as our trauma-informed care. And that's another big area for training that we're looking at, is being able to do that. And again, those all go back to staffing. When you're adequately staffed, you can do a lot more of those things than you can if you are not.
Thank you.
Representative Burke.
Thank you, Chairman. To try and tie together what we've been discussing over the last few minutes, would you say that it's accurate that if we prioritized funding for community-based waivers, Medicaid waivers, to try and address young people who have medical issues but need support at home from paid caregivers, and also foster care youth, if we prioritize those things with funding, would some of the problems at DJJ be rectified?
I'm always in favor of going upriver and stopping what we can. And I think for a lot of families, if they had better supports, kids that might have a lot of behavioral issues when they're 7 and 8, 9 and 10, they can manage them. And then all of a sudden he's 13 and he's 6'2" and weighs 180 pounds. And what you were doing with that youth no longer is working. And they do call the police because they need help because of some acting out or some things happen at school. That's another big resource into us. So certainly all of those services help. And I do know the state has really looked at that. I know that, we want to be like the best state in the nation on dealing with mental health issues, and SEAC has been very involved. That the Lieutenant Governor, that's one of her pet projects, I think, that she is very involved in and has been very useful and helpful on that. So yes, anything that would help, we're certainly looking at that.
Thank you.
And I think that pretty much does mine.
Well, I think you can see the sort of challenges, and I would just bring that back to what that means for the people trying to run these facilities. I mean, they are keeping young people who have these mental health issues, who have all sorts of issues, and they're also keeping young people who are very dangerous. I mean, the last I looked, I think out of our detention population, we probably had between 20 and 25 that are charged with murder, which to me is, that's a shocking statistic. So running these facilities is very challenging, and we appreciate the work that our staff does every day to do that. Just to finish up, Senate Bill 162 codified a number of investments that the Beshear administration has made over the last couple of years, and the legislature also provided additional statutory language to increase our staffing and to improve our security. Senate Bill 162 also requires that the Justice Cabinet and DJJ develop and implement a plan to create what would be a new model of regional detention, and the language is as soon as practicable, while safely segregating males and females and separating violent and nonviolent offenders. So that is a new system that is something different than we're doing now, and it's something different than the system that was put into place some 25 or 30 years ago. And I'll talk just to end up in just a couple of minutes some of the challenges that we may face in implementing that system. But first, I want to ask Ms. Norton to just quickly go through some of the appropriations that we were provided in the last legislative session, and what we're doing with that money and where we stand with that.
And we're certainly very appreciative for all of this additional funding that's going to help us to accomplish these goals. And some of these we've talked about already in the presentation, so I won't spend too long on any of them. But $3.2 million to maintain the salary increases for the DJJ youth workers that were discussed previously. $4.8 million to provide salary increases to other job classifications at DJJ, so those outside of that correctional officer series. $30 million to bring DOC correctional officers to a $50,000 starting salary so that they are at the same place as our DJJ correctional officers. $9.7 million for 146 additional DJJ youth workers. $200,000 for the operating expenses that are associated with that DJJ youth offender management system. $4 million to provide security upgrades within the DJJ detention centers and those facilities. $1.5 million for DJJ to establish a diversionary program to identify and provide treatment for youth with serious mental illness. $1.75 million to retain design experts to determine what facility changes are needed to return to that regional model that we just discussed. And $250,000 for the transportation costs for our female youth to be used until there is a return back to that regional model. So that is reimbursing law enforcement that may be transporting female youth to a facility that they would not normally, or previously, I should say, transport female youth to. And then in House Bill 3, it provided appropriation to reopen the Louisville detention facility, the downtown facility, as well as the facility that we currently have in Jefferson County as well. So it's $13.4 million to design and construct the first phase of renovating the downtown Louisville Youth Detention Center, $2 million in operating costs for that same facility, and then $4.5 million for the renovation of the Jefferson Regional Juvenile Detention Facility at Linden, so the facility that we currently have youth in within Jefferson County.
Okay. And then finally, before we finish, and I appreciate your patience. I know this has been a long presentation, but there's a lot to cover. I do want to talk for a few minutes about the challenges that we face as we are implementing Senate Bill 162 and House Bill 3 as it relates to capacity issues. House Bill 3, as we've discussed, requires that any juvenile charged with a violent crime must be detained until a detention hearing is held. That's not currently the law. According to AOC data, and of course we're reliant on AOC for this information, we wouldn't otherwise know this. This automatic detention provision will result in the detention of more than 400 juveniles a year than we are detaining under current law. And some of them will be released at the detention hearing within 48 hours. Some of them will be kept for a much longer period of time. So we're going to be detaining under House Bill 3 more juveniles than we're detaining now. Senate Bill 162 requires that we detain juveniles at the detention center that is closest to them, essentially their regional detention center, but that we also separate the juveniles within that detention center 4 ways. That we separate males and females, and we separate violent offenders from nonviolent offenders. So we're going to have within every facility potentially a population of females charged with violent offenses, a population of females charged with nonviolent offenses, males charged with violent offenses, males charged with nonviolent offenses. So I think you can see, and again, we're talking about small facilities. We've got most of our facilities are around 40 beds. And so we're going to have these 4 populations that we're going to have to dedicate beds to, which means that there's going to be a more inefficient use of those beds, because a facility in a lot of our regions may go for a long period of time without having any girls. But you never know, tonight at midnight, a police cruiser may roll up with 4 girls. So you've got to have those beds available when they show up. There's no, you can't send them to the Holiday Inn down the street. You got to have those beds available. So we're going to necessarily be having a lot of our beds that'll be vacant at any given time. This is going to, and we also, the way these physical facilities are laid out, most of them are laid out in like 4 pods of 10 beds apiece. They're not large facilities. And when we say we've got to separate these 4 populations, that means they have to have a separate living area. They have to go to school separately. They have to eat separately. They have to go to recreation separately. They have to take visits separately. So I think you can see that this is within the current physical constraints of our facilities. This is just going to be a challenge, both in terms of having enough beds to house them all, and in terms of just being able to reconfigure these facilities to create the separation that the law requires, and it requires it for good reason. I mean, believe me, we don't want to go back to mixing boys and girls and mixing high-level offenders and low-level offenders. But when we go away from what we're doing now and go back to these regional centers, it's going to be a challenge. And so what we are doing, and I say this just because I want to be transparent with you all as we encounter these challenges, because I think we're going to have to work together to figure out the best way to do this. We may require more resources at some point. And we are grateful that in Senate Bill 162, there's money appropriated to allow us to hire design experts and consultants to help us sit down and look at the footprint of each of these facilities, 8 facilities, and to try to figure out what we can do to accommodate Senate Bill 162's requirements, particularly considering the additional stress on capacity that will be created by House Bill 3. And as I've said before, when I talk about this, I'm not trying to engage in a policy debate about it. I'm trying to solve an arithmetic problem and figure out how we can make this work. And we're engaged in that analysis now. I think we have our RFP out for our consultants now. That'll be closing soon. And our plan is to sit down and try to figure out how to do this with what we've got. And if we can't figure it out, we'll be coming back to you all, to the legislature. And what we want to do is work collaboratively to find the best solution. So I just want to mention those issues. There was, and I want to say that through this last legislative session, I think in regard to juvenile justice, the process really worked the way it should work. We were able, I think, to have really good collaboration with the authors of some of the legislation. We were able to have a good exchange of ideas, and the legislation changed as a result of that. We didn't agree on everything, it didn't change in some ways that we wanted it to, but that's, these are complex problems. There's nothing wrong with having good faith disagreements. So I hope we can continue that kind of collaboration as we go forward, because I think we can all see that these are complicated problems that deal with a very vulnerable situation, and that also affects the public safety in Kentucky. It affects the safety of all of our citizens. So I look forward to working cooperatively with the General Assembly and with all of the stakeholders to continue this process. I'll sort of end where I began. I think that our detention system is very much improved over the last year. I think our facilities are safer, they're more secure. I know our staffing is improved. We've got a lot of things that are in process, but we're not where we want to be. This is a journey, and I think we've made good progress, but I would be the first to acknowledge that we have a long way to go. Again, I appreciate your patience. I know this has been a long presentation, but I think there's a lot going on in this area, and we'll be happy to take any questions.
Representative Blanton has another question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And going back to the AOC data and the 400 additional that, I've got it on. I'm wavering up here back and forth, right? So I break that down, if we spread that out evenly, which it's not, it'd be about 33 1/3 per month. That's under pristine conditions, right? And spread out evenly across the state. But I guess my question is, of those 400, would the majority of those we would see be in Fayette and Jefferson? And I say that because they have a bigger population concentration.
Well, that I think undoubtedly Fayette and Jefferson would probably have more kids than anywhere else, but they'll be spread out. And that's one of the things, when we first got this data from AOC, they just gave us the wrong numbers. Or no, they gave us the right numbers, but they gave us the numbers for the whole system. And we've gone back to them and said, well, and I think they provided this to us now, but we've got to have the numbers we got to break it down by catchment area, because, and I think that's where you're going, this will affect every region differently. And there may be a region where we could handle this, and there may be a region that we couldn't. And in that regard, I would say the footprint of our facilities is different. I mean, we have some facilities where if we needed to, we could expand. We have some facilities where we just don't have any. There's no land to expand. But yeah, there'd be more from Fayette and Jefferson than anywhere else for sure.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Wanted to, I guess, outline, and correct me if I'm incorrect, about $75 million has been allocated during this session between Jefferson County and the overall system. That's why I went through the calculation. So it leads me to say or think, all right, you've got the process, or at least getting things going in terms of a salary, and then also looking at the facility in Jefferson County. What is your time frame? Because you mentioned RFP is about ready to close. You're going to bring somebody in. So what's your time frame and sense of urgency to make this happen? And then follow up by that, what do you think in your gut feeling in terms of your anticipated needs from a dollar perspective?
It involves arithmetic, Rebecca.
So the RFP for the consultant that would be looking at all the detention facilities actually closed today at 2 p.m., so that's probably passed by now. And so our hope is that we will have a contract in place, assuming that there were responses, July 1, basically. And so from that point, within the RFP, we did indicate that what we were really looking for in this assessment was a very timely assessment as well as cost estimates. So if they're taking this data and looking at a facility and we determine with them, to go back to this regional model, this facility needs an additional 2 pods. The goal would be to have that architectural consulting firm be able to give us a cost estimate for what that would be, hopefully by mid-September, so that we can include that in the biennial budget request and have that information to you in a timely manner, so that we can kind of give a projection of what this would cost and what the options might be to accomplish it.
Do you have a gut feeling what you need in terms of dollars?
Not at the moment, no. I mean, I think we know how expensive some of the capital construction has been. Just the renovation of the Linden facility is estimated at $4.5 million, and that is just to upgrade the cells that we currently have to be wet cells. So you can kind of imagine from that point what something might look like to add actual additional square footage to some of these facilities.
Okay. And one more question, Mr. Chairman. Do you think, is there a correlation between good programming and lowering juvenile crime? And give me an example or give me some thoughts of yes or no in terms of your response.
Are you talking about like all of it, community programming across the board, or just what's in facilities?
We talked about mental health. We talked about, bringing in new individuals with hopefully expertise to address whatever might address. In Louisville, we've got an issue in terms of getting more involved with the gang violence and bringing in somebody to make a little more forceful initiative to basically go after those gang leaders as an incentive to have them crack down. All those sorts of things. Yeah, that's the correlation to all that, to lowering the juvenile crime.
Yeah, I think it's definitely related, and you're looking at an entire spectrum. I mean, I think it starts with, we know the research shows us that kids are treated best outside of the juvenile justice system. When they've done studies on what's the number one thing that makes all the factors of youth be involved later with the adult system, they looked at substance abuse of the child, substance abuse of the parents, all these different factors. It was going behind the door of a detention center, because once you kick that in, so many other ripples happen. It's like knocking over the first domino, and there's sort of a ripple effect. So we know that we want to keep as many kids, and Senate Bill 200 was good at doing that. So we want to have those systems out there at the school level. A lot of things we're doing, and we do a lot of that with our day treatment centers. Our alternative schools are described as a school with a counseling component. Our day treatment centers are treatment. They're supposed to be treatment facilities with an educational component. So we really looked at expanding our resources there, hooking up kids with services. We put washers and dryers in all of them so kids will have clean clothes when they come in and wash their clothes. We send backpacks, just like schools do, of food. We have really broadened our community We're looking at multisystemic therapy, which is an evidence-based program, and this is with private providers, and it's something we're going to do with this diversionary money, where caseworkers get a very small group of kids, and they work on all the issues that, kind of like I described with the YAP program, about those issues that involve with them. So, you're going to knock some kids out at that level. You're still going to have some kids come in our program that have to be for community safety in our facilities. And yes, I do think programming. And one of the things I'm most proud of we've talked so much about detention, is our youth development centers, which I guess it's good news you haven't heard anything about them, because they've trucked on doing what they need to do. But we have some excellent vocational program. We have kids who've gotten tons of certificates. We have some youth that, they're on the way to a welding job as soon as they leave our facility. We had one youth, I was just recently at our Woods Bend facility, and the vocational coordinator there said they have one of his youth, he still calls back to them. He went through the building and trades where they build, lumber and wiring and do all of that. And he's operating his own very successful business, making, I'm sure, a lot more money than I am, up and down the coast where they hit hurricanes and they rebuild, and he still calls the facility. So I think having opportunities, because if they don't have those opportunities, they just go back to the same lifestyle and so forth that they had. So I think another program that we're really proud of, we have our whole clinical steering committee, which looks at evidence-based practices, and it's been a real game changer. I don't know how many of y'all have heard of aggression replacement training, ART it's called, and we do that at Lake Cumberland is one of our prime examples, have done that, and they have just, our clinical person there has said it has been a game changer, that those kids go through that. And they have a graduation ceremony at the end when they go, and I went to one of the recent graduation ceremonies. And one of the things I asked the kid was, do you think this would be helpful if everybody had this? And they were all like, yes. And they individually talked about how significant learning these different ways of behaving and being able to interrupt the patterns of behavior they've developed have been useful to them. So I wouldn't be in this job if I wasn't a big believer in second chances. And we know a lot of these kids will grow out of this stuff, and if given the right opportunities, that they'll become productive citizens in our community, and that's our whole goal.
Good. Well, thank you for the detailed explanation. I do appreciate all the efforts you've gone through. I encourage you to communicate with this committee or in either chamber into the judicial committee as well as the A&R, because once you come to a conclusion and what you're trying to figure out in September, hopefully the communications and transparency is going to be prominent in your mind to talk to this side of government in order to look what we could do to try to move the needle forward, because we definitely needed to address the juvenile justice issues. Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Douglas.
Thank you, Chairman Storm. More of a comment than question, may I?
Yes.
Kind of promised myself I wouldn't talk much today, but one of the things I learned coming from a family of 16 is it doesn't take a lot of money to guide or to discipline kids, but it does take patience. It does take a willingness to discipline, and it really takes a lot of consistency. While I'm here, one of the things I'm going to work really hard on, respectfully, because you guys are doing a great job, is to put you guys out of business. We shouldn't have to meet to see how we need to put more money into a system that we know is continuing to grow in a direction that we don't want it to grow, which means we have to be more active, and I'm talking about in the legislature and in some of our other social services, to treat this problem upstream, because unless we treat the problem upstream, it won't help you all at all. You will continue to grow. And so, I'll make this commitment that I will help work with people upstream so that you can continue to do the fine job that you're doing, and hopefully work yourself into a situation where you have normal hours. But thank you all for presenting today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I will join you, Senator Douglas, in that pledge. But I want to deal with the problem at hand, and I want to take a different position to Representative Blanton, because as Secretary Harvey already mentioned, labor markets vary from one location to another location. and what might be an attractive and competitive salary in one part of Kentucky, as already indicated, may not be when you talk about Jefferson County and Campbell County. So to me, the most important consideration is getting enough staffing in place so that you can deal with all kind of disciplinary issues and other similar related issues that arise there. So I would ask, and I would appreciate your response, to give some thought to, if we can't get an adequate number of people staffed in Campbell County or in Jefferson County, then let's look at suggesting an increase in salary so we can be competitive in those areas, so we can have enough staffing, so we can avoid some of the problems that we've seen in other areas, such as Adair County. I'd like your thoughts and opinions on that.
Well, I would say that first of all, we're so pleased and grateful to everyone. The governor's led on this. The General Assembly has provided resources on this to be able to go from a starting pay of $30,000 a year to $50,000 a year in 2 or 3 years. The way state government often works is, that's I'm proud of that. But I'd also say this, and if any of you have seen the work that our people are doing, ain't nobody going to say that they're overpaid at $50,000 a year. Nobody's going to say that. So I agree with you, Senator Thomas. I would just say that if we're going to have these detention facilities, I think all of us in government have to be committed. I would say the same thing about our correctional facilities. We have to be committed to whatever the funding level it is to operate these facilities in a safe and secure manner. If we don't do that, it's self-defeating. What we're doing is self-defeating. And we're gonna continue to have problems, and we're gonna turn out people who are not better people coming out than going in, which is the opposite of what we want to do. And these labor markets are different. I don't know how you approach that in the context of state government, because the compensation system is what it is in state government. But I suspect we've got a lot of people in here that believe in free markets, and you can't go into a BMW dealership with Volkswagen money and drive away with a car. And we sort of operate in the same constraints here. What I would say is that we just need to be committed to constantly review this, because again, I'm appreciative and I am so proud of what we've been able to accomplish on the compensation side. But this is a river, not a lake. It constantly moves. And what might be an appropriate compensation level to be competitive today, 2 years from now, we may be out of the market again. And if we're not willing to keep up, we'll find ourselves going through the same kind of stuff that we've been through in the last year. So I don't know if that's a very good answer, Senator Thomas, but I just think this is a commitment that collectively we need to make, but because it's only equitable to the people doing this hard work, and it's necessary for the juveniles that are in their care.
No. I appreciate you saying that, Secretary Harvey.
Seeing no further questions, Senator Neal has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really don't have a question. I just want to commend each of you on this presentation. I remember starting back, Mr. Chairman, on this journey as part of a task force looking into this particular piece, and I'm going to tell you, you could look left and you could look right, but it didn't seem like there's a way out. But this presentation and the response of the legislature as well, but the work that your people are doing and your insights gained from this presentation, I think, are extraordinary. And I think it's a good response. But I also think there's a long way to go. And you receive these kids, a number of them, and you have no choice but to receive them. But there's a whole society out there that's producing what comes to your door. It's going to be a lot to deal with that going forward. So, but I have to say this is an excellent presentation, and it gives me hope that we are at least going in the right direction now. We got a long way to go, but thank you so very much.
Thank you, sir.
I want to thank you, and actually, if you don't mind indulging me, just because I know a lot of staff watch this hearing, and I just want to state that I am very proud of our dedicated DJJ staff out there. They do an extremely difficult job. They get very little public recognition for the work they do. You know, they were there during COVID, it being exposed and exposing their family in a congregate care setting. We had staff when the tornado hit our Mayfield facility who stayed with the kids when their own homes were blown away. We had the floods in eastern Kentucky. They have go 110% to serve our kids, and I just want to state that I'm very proud of them and proud to be involved with them, so thank you.
Now, seeing no further questions or comments, I'd like to thank the presenters. I'd like to thank all the members for the robust conversation and questioning. Thank our staff, and if there's no further business, I'd ask that we have a motion to adjourn. Motion. Second. Sustained.